Have you ever wondered why one piece of land is so central to a story that spans millennia? It all begins with a promise, a divine covenant made with one man, Abraham. In a world of wandering tribes and shifting empires, God appeared to him and made a declaration that would echo through history. To your offspring, I will give this land. This wasn't just a casual statement. It was a covenant, a solemn, binding agreement between God and humanity. Think of it as the most sacred contract ever made. God wasn't just giving a gift. He was forging a relationship, binding his name and his people to a specific place on earth. This land, later known as Canaan, became the tangible sign of God's faithfulness and the future hope of Abraham's descendants. This promise, however, would be tested by time and trial. Centuries passed. Abraham's descendants, the Israelites, found themselves not in a land of their own, but as slaves in the mighty empire of Egypt. Their days were filled with grueling labor under the harsh sun, making bricks for a pharaoh who had forgotten their history and despised their existence. Their nights were filled with cries of anguish, a people crushed under the weight of oppression. Hope seemed a distant memory, the ancient promise, a forgotten dream. In their suffering, they cried out, and their cry for help reached the heavens. God had not forgotten his covenant. He saw their misery and heard their groaning. The stage was set for one of the greatest rescue missions in history. Out in the wilderness of Midian, a man named Moses, an Israelite raised in Pharaoh's court, but now a fugitive shepherd, encountered God in a truly spectacular way. A bush that burned but was not consumed. From this fire, God spoke, revealing his plan. He said, I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Notice the words, bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land. This was the echo of the promise made to Abraham, now being set into motion. God was about to fulfill his end of the covenant. Armed with God's power and authority, Moses returned to Egypt. What followed was an epic confrontation. Pharaoh's heart was hard, his grip on his workforce unyielding, but God's power was greater. Through a series of 10 devastating plagues, God demonstrated his sovereignty over the gods of Egypt and over Pharaoh himself, from the Nile turning to blood to the final heart-wrenching plague on the firstborn. Each act was a blow to the empire's power and a step towards Israel's freedom. Finally, with his nation in ruins, a broken Pharaoh let the people go. The Israelites, guided by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, began their exodus. But their journey was far from over. As the Israelites stood at the edge of the Red Sea, with the Egyptian army closing in behind them, fear gave way to despair. They were trapped, but Moses told them to stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord. In a moment of ultimate divine intervention, God parted the waters, creating a dry path through the heart of the sea. The Israelites walked through on dry ground, walls of water on their right and on their left. Once they were safely across, the waters crashed back down, destroying the pursuing Egyptian army. They were truly free, not by their own strength, but by the miraculous hand of God. This event would forever be etched in their national memory as the ultimate proof of God's power to save and his commitment to his people. Now free from bondage, the Israelites began their long journey through the formidable Sinai wilderness. It was here, at the foot of Mount Sinai, that God formalized his covenant with the entire nation. He gave them the 10 Commandments and the law, a guide for how to live as his chosen people, a holy nation set apart for him. It was a blueprint for a society founded on justice, righteousness, and worship of the one true God. This was not just about receiving rules. It was about deepening the relationship. God was preparing them to be a nation worthy of the land he had promised. He provided for them miraculously in the desert, sending manna from heaven to eat and water from a rock to drink, teaching them daily dependence on him before they entered the land. As a new generation stood ready to cross the Jordan River, Moses once again reminded them of the origin and purpose of their journey. He spoke God's words to them, reinforcing the ancient promise, and I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. This statement connected their present reality directly to the past. It wasn't just about conquering new territory. It was about inheriting a promise, a divine legacy. The generation that came out of Egypt had faltered in faith, but God's covenant remained. He was still faithful. The land was their inheritance, sworn to their forefathers. Finally, after 40 years of wandering, a period of testing and purification, the Israelites stood on the plains of Moab, looking across the river at their destination. Moses, their faithful leader, climbed Mount Nebo to see the land he would not enter. Before he passed, he delivered his final address to the people, recorded in the book of Deuteronomy. He urged them, "See, I have given you this land. Go in and take possession of the land the Lord swore he would give to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to their descendants after them." This was the final command. The green light. The journey that started with a promise to one man was about to reach its climax. It was time for the people to act in faith and take hold of what God had sworn to give them. So, why did this land matter so much? It was never just about real estate. The Promised Land was the physical manifestation of God's faithfulness. It was proof that God keeps his promises, even across centuries of slavery and wandering. It was the place where they could finally live out their calling as a nation under God, free from the influence of foreign idols and oppressive rulers. The land flowing with milk and honey was a symbol of God's blessing and provision. It was their home, their identity, and the stage upon which the rest of their national story, a story of kings, prophets, exile, and return, would unfold. The entire epic, from Abraham's call to the crossing of the Jordan, is a powerful testament to a God who makes covenants and, against all odds. Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a waiting room? That in-between place where you've left where you were, but you haven't quite arrived where you're going. It's a place of uncertainty, a place that tests your patience and your faith. For the ancient Israelites, this wasn't just a feeling, it was a 40-year reality. Their journey from slavery in Egypt to the promise of a new homeland is one of history's most epic tales of survival, faith, and human nature. It's a story that unfolds in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Imagine this. You've just witnessed the impossible. A sea splits in two. You walk through on dry land, and then you watch as that same sea crashes down on the army that held you in bondage for generations. You are free. The euphoria must have been incredible. But then, the dust settles. You're standing at the edge of a massive, barren desert. There are no maps, no grocery stores, no running water. Just you, millions of others, and the endless sand stretching out before you. Where do you go? This is where their journey truly begins, and it starts with a miracle of guidance. A pillar of cloud appears in the sky. By day, it leads them, a visible, moving sign of God's presence, offering shade from the relentless sun. By night, this cloud transforms into a pillar of fire, illuminating their path, providing warmth against the desert chill, and protecting them from the dangers of the dark. This wasn't a subtle sign. It was a constant, undeniable, 24/7 reminder. You are not alone, Yamwheat. Every step you take, I am leading you. It's a powerful image of divine direction. When they stopped, the pillar stopped. When they moved, the pillar moved. Their entire existence was dictated by this supernatural guide. But guidance is one thing, survival is another. Soon, the initial joy of freedom gives way to a pressing real-world problem. Hunger. The provisions they brought from Egypt run out. The murmuring starts, a low rumble of fear and discontent that would become a recurring theme of their journey. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? They ask Moses. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, or so the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. It's a classic case of selective memory, isn't it? They remembered the food of Egypt, but forgot the whips of the taskmasters. They remembered the flavors, but forgot their bondage. Fear has a way of erasing gratitude. And yet, in the face of their complaint, God responds not with anger, but with grace. The next morning, they wake up to find the ground covered with a thin, flaky substance, like frost. What is it? They ask each other. In Hebrew, manhood, which sounds like manna. And so it was named. This was their daily bread. Literally. Every morning, for 40 years. it appeared. The instructions were simple. Gather enough for today. Don't hoard it, because it will spoil. Trust that there will be more tomorrow. On the day before the Sabbath, gather a double portion, because none will appear on the day of rest. This was a daily lesson in trust and dependence. It taught them to live in the present, to rely on God's provision one day at a time, and to honor the rhythm of work and rest he established. Manna wasn't just food for the body, it was a school for the soul, teaching them to walk by faith, not by sight. The journey continues, and soon, another crisis hits. There's no water. The thirst is maddening, the fear is palpable, and the complaints erupt again, even louder this time. They're on the verge of stoning their leader, Moses. Once again, they question the whole enterprise. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us, and our children, and our livestock with thirst? It's a desperate, angry cry. And Moses, caught between a terrified populace and a holy God, cries out for help. The instruction he receives is strange. Take your staff, God says, and strike the rock at Horeb. A rock. Moses is supposed to get water from a solid rock. Can you imagine the scene? A crowd of millions, parched and angry, watching their leader walk up to a boulder and hit it with a stick. It must have seemed like madness. But Moses obeys. He strikes the rock, and out of this barren, lifeless stone, water gushes forth. Enough water for millions of people and all their animals. A river in the desert. This wasn't just a magical trick. It was a profound statement. The God who could bring a nation through the sea, who could rain down bread from the sky, could also bring life-giving water from the most impossible of sources. It was a demonstration that his power is not limited by natural circumstances. Where human logic sees a dead end, God can create a new beginning. He's the God of the impossible. So, they have a divine GPS in the sky, a daily catering service from heaven, and a miraculous water source on demand. You'd think they would be the most grateful, faithful people on earth, right? Well, human nature is a complicated thing. The pattern continues. They face a new challenge, and the complaining begins. They get tired of the manna. They miss the food of Egypt. They fear the inhabitants of the land. They are promised. They doubt God's goodness. They question Moses' leadership. At one point, their rebellion becomes so intense that they decide they've had enough. They want to elect a new leader and go back to Egypt, back to slavery. It's a staggering moment. After all the miracles, all the provision, all the personal care, they want to return to the very place God so dramatically rescued them from. They preferred the familiar misery of slavery to the uncertain freedom of the wilderness. This is where the story gets really interesting, because it holds up a mirror to our own hearts. How often do we do the same? We pray for a breakthrough, and when God provides it, we find the journey that follows is harder than we expected. We start to romanticize the past, forgetting the pain and focusing only on the comfort of the familiar. We doubt God's goodness when the path gets steep. We complain about the manna in our lives, wishing for something different, something more exciting. The wilderness journey reveals a powerful contrast between divine faithfulness and human doubt. On one hand, you have God's relentless patience, despite the people's grumbling, their rebellion, and their outright unbelief. The pillar of cloud and fire never disappears. The manna never stops falling every morning, except on the Sabbath. God continues to lead them, protect them, and provide for them. His commitment to his promise is unshakable, even when his people are at their most faithless. His love isn't dependent on their performance. On the other hand, you see the stubbornness of the human heart, the tendency to forget blessings quickly and magnify problems, the inclination to trust our own fears over God's promises. The Israelites had every reason to trust. They had a mountain of evidence of God's power and love. Yet, with each new challenge, it was as if their memory was wiped clean, and they had to learn the lesson of faith all over again. But here's the most hopeful part of the story. Even in their failure, God doesn't abandon them. Yes, there are consequences for their rebellion. The generation that left Egypt, the ones who constantly grumbled, would not enter the promised land. Their fear and doubt kept them wandering until they passed away. But God's promise to the nation of Israel did not fail. He was raising up a new generation, their children, who were learning from their parents' mistakes. A generation that grew up in the wilderness, knowing nothing but dependence on God. a generation whose entire life experience was one of daily miracles. This long, arduous, 40-year trek was not just about getting from point A to point B. It was a process of transformation. God was forging a nation. He was stripping away their slave mentality and teaching them what it meant to be as free people. He was teaching them that true freedom isn't the absence of problems, but the presence of God in the midst of them. He was teaching them that faith is not a one-time decision, but a daily walk of trust. The journey through the wilderness is our story, too. We all have our own deserts to cross, our own periods of waiting and uncertainty. We all face moments where we are tempted to complain, to doubt, and to wish we could go back to something more familiar, even if it was less free. This ancient story reminds us to look for the pillars of cloud and fire in our own lives, ways God is guiding us, even when the path is unclear. It encourages us to be grateful for the manna, the daily provisions we so often take for granted, and to trust that there will be enough for tomorrow. It gives us hope that even when we are faced with a solid rock of impossibility, God can bring forth streams of life. And most of all, it reminds us of God's incredible patience and faithfulness. Even when we doubt, He remains steadfast. Even when we wander, He is still leading us home. From the wilderness of Paran, a divine command was given to Moses. Choose one leader from each ancestral tribe of Israel and send them to scout the land of Canaan, the land I am giving to them. 12 men, leaders among their people, were chosen for this crucial mission. Moses sent them with clear instructions. Go up through the Negev and into the hill country. See what the land is like. Are the people strong or weak, few or many? Is the land good or bad? Are the towns unwalled or fortified? And bring back some of the fruit of the land. The spies ventured deep into Canaan, a journey filled with anticipation. They traveled all the way to the valley of Esh. There, they were stunned by what they saw. The land was more fertile than they could have imagined. They cut down a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes so large it took 2 men to carry it on a pole between them. They also gathered pomegranates and figs. Upon their return, they presented the magnificent fruit to Moses and the entire assembly. They reported, "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit." But their report was a double-edged sword. While the land was bountiful, a shadow of fear had crept into their hearts. They spoke of powerful people, large fortified cities, and descendants of enough. The evidence of God's promise was right before their eyes. Yet so was the challenge. A seed of doubt was sown, pitting faith against fear. A choice had to be made, a choice that would echo through generations. The desert air hums with anticipation. 40 long days have passed since the 12 spies, one from each tribe of Israel, crossed into the promised land of Canaan. Now, they are returning. A murmur ripples through the vast camp of the Israelites, swelling into a wave of excited chatter. Children peer over their parents' shoulders. Elders lean forward, their faces etched with hope. This is it. The moment they have all been waiting for. The culmination of their journey from Egypt. The spies walk into the clearing, their expressions hard to read, but in their hands, they carry a tangible promise. A single, massive cluster of grapes, so heavy it takes 2 men to carry it on a pole. They also bring pomegranates and figs. The crowd gasps. The land flows with milk and honey, just as God promised. A smile breaks out on Moses' face as he looks at the fruit. The dream is real. It's within their grasp. The initial report is good. Yes, the land is everything they had hoped for. The fruit is proof of its incredible bounty. But then, the tone shifts. 10 of the spies step forward, their faces clouded with doubt. They speak of the people who live there, describing them as powerful and strong. They talk of the cities not as opportunities, but as impenetrable fortresses, with walls that reach up to the heavens. The crowd's cheers falter, replaced by an uneasy silence. The spies' words paint a picture not of promise, but of peril. They speak of the Amalekites in the south, the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites in the mountains, and the Canaanites by the sea. The land, they say, is not empty and waiting. It is occupied by formidable enemies. This single cluster of grapes, once a symbol of hope, now seems like a cruel joke, a taste of something they can never truly possess. Then comes the word that shatters all hope. Giants. The spies' voices drop, filled with a primal fear. They speak of the Nephilim, the descendants of Anak. We saw them there, they stammer, their eyes wide with the memory. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. An audible gasp sweeps through the crowd. The image is terrifyingly vivid. These weren't just tall men, they were giants, beings of immense size and strength that made the Israelite warriors feel as small and insignificant as insects. The spies describe how they cowered in the shadows, watching these titans walk the land. The fortified cities suddenly seem even more daunting, built by and for giants. The promise of a land flowing with milk and honey is drowned out by the terror of a land inhabited by giants. The hope that had filled the air just moments before evaporates like a mirage in the desert heat, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The fear is contagious. It spreads faster than a desert fire. The spies' words, born of their own terror, infect the hearts of the people. You can see it on their faces. The bright eyes of the children fill with confusion and fear. The hopeful smiles of the women and men twist into masks of horror. Whispers start to ripple through the crowd. Giants. We can't fight them. They will crush us. The whispers grow louder, more frantic, turning into panicked cries. Despair descends upon the camp like a thick, suffocating blanket. The collective dream of a new home, a new life of freedom, shatters into a million pieces. They had faced the Egyptian army, crossed the Red Sea, and survived the wilderness, all fueled by a promise. But this new obstacle, these giants, feels insurmountable. It feels like a death sentence. The joy of a moment ago is now a bitter memory, and the future is a terrifying void. That night, a terrible sound echoes through the desert. It is the sound of an entire nation weeping. The camp of Israel is filled with wailing and despair. The people's fear has curdled into anger and rebellion. They gather in furious mobs, turning on the very leaders who had brought them this far. They cry out against Moses and Aaron. Why has the Lord brought us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? They shout, their voices raw with grief and rage. Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? The sentiment is shocking. After all they had endured to escape bondage, they now long for the familiarity of their chains. The thought of facing the giants is so terrifying that slavery seems like a preferable alternative. Chalice reigns. In their panic, they begin to talk of choosing a new leader, someone who will lead them back to Egypt, back to the life they had been so miraculously delivered from. But in the midst of this pandemonium, two voices rise in defiance. Joshua and Caleb, the other two spies, tear their clothes in anguish at the people's lack of faith. They run into the heart of the rebellious crowd, pleading with them. The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. Caleb shouts, his voice ringing with conviction. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Joshua stands beside him, his face a beacon of unwavering trust. Only do not rebel against the Lord, he would hiss them, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. They try to remind the people of God's power, the same power that parted the sea and provided for them in the desert. But their words fall on deaf ears. The crowd, blinded by fear and rage, sees their faith not as courage, but as betrayal. They pick up stones, ready to silence the two men who dared to believe in the promise. They were on the brink of killing the only two who held on to the truth. This single night of fear and rebellion would change the course of their history, a tragic consequence of choosing to see the giants instead of God. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content. From the vast wilderness of Paran, a command was given. Moses, the leader of the Israelites, stood before 12 men, one from each tribe, chosen for a mission of immense importance. Their task was to venture into Canaan, the land promised to them by God, and bring back a report. For 40 days and 40 nights, they were to be the eyes of a nation, to see the future that awaited them. Their names were read, concluding with Hoshea son of Nun, whom Moses renamed Joshua, and Caleb son of Jephunneh from the tribe of Judah. With Moses' blessing, they departed, leaving behind a nation holding its breath, waiting for news of their inheritance. The 12 spies traveled north, their sandals kicking up the dust of the desert until it gave way to the fertile soil of Canaan. What they found was beyond their wildest imaginations. This was not the harsh, unforgiving wilderness they had known for so long. This was a land literally flowing with milk and honey. They walked through lush valleys and climbed green hills. They saw fields of grain swaying in the breeze like a golden sea. The orchards were heavy with pomegranates, figs, and olives, their branches groaning under the weight of the fruit. In the valley of Eshcol they found a cluster of grapes so massive, so impossibly large, that it took 2 men to carry it on a pole between them. They had seen the promise with their own eyes. This was a land of abundance, a paradise gifted by God. After 40 days, the spies returned to the camp at Canaan. The entire congregation of Israel gathered, their faces filled with anticipation. The spies displayed the magnificent fruit they had brought back, a tangible testament to the land's richness. The initial report was exhilarating. "We went into the land to which you sent us," they began, "and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit." A wave of excitement rippled through the crowd, but then the tone shifted. 10 of the spies, their faces now grim, stepped forward. Their words began to paint a different, terrifying picture. "But the people who live there are powerful," one said, his voice laced with fear. "The cities are fortified and very large." Another added, "We saw descendants of Anak there." Giants, the word hung in the air, heavy and cold. The report spiraled into a litany of horrors. They described Amalekites in the south, Hittites and Jebusites in the mountains, Canaanites by the sea. They spoke of warriors so fearsome and cities so impregnable that any attempt to conquer them would be suicide. Finally, they delivered their crushing conclusion. "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." They spread a bad report, saying, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." A collective gasp swept through the assembly, followed by a low murmur that grew into a wail of despair. Hope, so bright just moments before, was extinguished, replaced by the chilling darkness of fear. The people wept through the night. Their dream of a homeland, the promise that had sustained them through slavery and wilderness, was shattered. They turned on Moses and Aaron, their cries echoing through the camp. "If only we had died in Egypt, or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" In their terror, they even began to conspire. "Let's choose a new leader and go back." In the midst of this chaos, 2 voices rose to challenge the tide of fear: Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh. Their faces, etched with grief and righteous anger, tore their clothes in mourning for the people's lack of faith. Caleb stepped forward, silencing the crowd with the sheer force of his conviction. "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good." Thundered, "If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us." Joshua joined him, his voice ringing with passion and unwavering trust. "Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." They pleaded with the people to see beyond the giants and the high walls, to see the promise and the power of the God who had split the Red Sea and fed them with manna from heaven. How dare they contradict the majority? How dare they ask them to march to their deaths? The murmurs turned to shouts, and the shouts to a single, terrifying cry. "Stone them!" The crowd surged forward, their hands reaching for rocks, their faces contorted with a murderous rage. The lives of the 2 faithful spies hung by a thread, about to be extinguished by the very people they sought to save. At that very moment, as the first stones were being lifted, a blinding light erupted from the tabernacle. The glory of the Lord appeared before all the Israelites, a brilliant, terrifying presence that stopped everyone in their tracks. The rocks fell from their hands. The shouts died in their throats. They fell back in awe and terror before the manifest power of their God. Joshua and Caleb were saved, shielded by the divine intervention they had so faithfully trusted in. Then the voice of the Lord spoke to Moses, a voice not of comfort, but of judgment. The people had been tested, and they had failed. They had seen his miracles and his glory, yet they chose fear over faith, rebellion over obedience. The consequences were severe and heartbreaking. The Lord declared that not one person from that generation, 20 years old or more, who had grumbled against him, would ever enter the promised land. They were sentenced to wander the wilderness for 40 years. 1 year for each day the spies had explored the land, until the last of their generation had fallen. Their children, the very ones they feared would be plundered, would be the ones to inherit the promise. Only Caleb, because he had a different spirit and followed the Lord wholeheartedly, and Joshua would live to enter Canaan. The story of Joshua and Caleb stands as a timeless monument to the power of faith in the face of overwhelming fear. While 10 saw giants and insurmountable obstacles, 2 saw God's promise and his unwavering power. They understood that the size of the giants didn't matter when compared to the size of their God. Their courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to trust God in spite of it. Their legacy challenges us today when we face the giants in our own lives. Will we see ourselves as grasshoppers, or will we remember that the Lord is with us and choose to walk forward in faith? Have you ever stood on the brink of a promise? A dream so close you could almost touch it, only to be paralyzed by fear? This isn't just a modern feeling. It's a story as old as time, a pivotal moment in the history of Israel that teaches us profound lessons about faith, fear, and the consequences of our choices. Let's travel back thousands of years to the edge of the wilderness, where a nation stirred at a crossroads. After their miraculous exodus from Egypt and receiving the law at Mount Sinai, the people of Israel finally arrived at the border of Canaan, the land God had promised to their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The moment of fulfillment was at hand. God commanded Moses, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." And so, 12 men, leaders from each tribe, were chosen for this critical mission. They displayed the enormous cluster of grapes and said, "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." You can imagine the excitement rippling through the crowd. This was it. The dream was real. But then, the tone shifted dramatically. 10 of the spies continued, "Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan." Their words were like a dark cloud, extinguishing the spark of hope. They painted a picture not of promise, but of insurmountable obstacles. They concluded with a statement of utter despair. "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are." They gave what the Bible calls an evil report, saying the land devours its inhabitants, and that all the people they saw were of great stature. "There we saw the giants," they claimed, "and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." They saw the same land, the same fruit, the same people, but where God saw a promise to be claimed, they saw a threat to be feared. Their fear-filled perspective was contagious. As the report spread, a wave of panic and despair washed over the entire nation. But 2 voices rose in opposition. Caleb, filled with a different spirit, quieted the people before Moses and said with unwavering conviction, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." Joshua joined him, and together they tore their clothes in anguish at the people's unbelief. They pleaded, "The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us." Caleb and Joshua saw the same giants, but they saw a bigger God. They remembered the plagues in Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, the provision of manna in the desert. Their faith was not in their own strength, but in the power of the God who had brought them this far. Tragically, the people did not listen. The seeds of fear, planted by the 10 spies, had taken root. The Bible says all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. Their grief quickly turned to rebellion. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? In their terror, they forgot God's power and his promises. They saw only the giants in the land, not the giant God who was on their side. They made a staggering decision. Let us select a leader and return to Egypt. They were ready to trade their glorious destiny for the familiar chains of slavery. They were so enraged by Joshua and Caleb's words of faith that the whole assembly talked of stoning them. At that moment the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle before all the children of Israel. God's patience had run out. He spoke to Moses, "How long will these people reject me, and how long will they not believe me? With all the signs which I have performed among them, I will strike them with the pestilence, and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they." Here we see one of the most powerful moments of intercession in the Bible. Moses, faced with the chance to become the father of a new, mightier nation, instead pleaded for the people who had just rebelled against him. He reminded God of his own character, his reputation among the nations, and his promises. "And have put me to the test now these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice. They shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers." Their desire to die in the wilderness would become their reality. For every day the spies had been in the land, 40 days in total. The nation would now wander for 40 years, a year for a day. An entire generation, everyone 20 years old and upward who had grumbled against God, would perish in the desert. Their children, whom they feared would become victims, would be the ones to inherit the promise. And what of the spies? The 10 men who brought the evil report died immediately by a plague before the Lord. But God made a special exception for the 2 who stood firm. He said, "But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it." Joshua, too, was spared. They alone of that generation would live to cross the Jordan and enter the promised land. This story serves as a sobering reminder of the devastating power of unbelief. An entire generation forfeited their inheritance because they chose to believe a report of fear over the promise of God. They stood at the very threshold of their destiny and turned back. Their journey, which could have taken days, became a 40-year funeral march. Yet, amidst the judgment, we also see God's faithfulness. He did not abandon his covenant. He punished the guilty, but he preserved a future for their children, and he honored the faith of Joshua and Caleb, proving that trusting him, even when the odds seem impossible, is never in vain. This account challenges us to examine our own hearts. When we face giants in our lives, obstacles that seem too big, challenges that feel insurmountable, which report will we believe? The one that magnifies the problem, or the one that magnifies our God? Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into these powerful biblical narratives. Have you ever felt like you've had been waiting for a promise for so long that you've had started to forget what it even felt like to hope? Maybe you feel like your best years are behind you, and the dreams you once had are now just distant memories. If that's you, I want to tell you a story today about a man whose faith didn't just survive the test of time. It grew stronger. A man who waited 45 years for a promise, and then, at the age of 85, stood up and said, "It's time." This is the story of Caleb, a story about a faith that doesn't age, and the incredible rewards that come from a life of obedience. Let's set the scene. The Israelites have finally, after 40 long years of wandering in the desert, entered the promised land. The battles have been fierce, cities have been conquered, kings have been defeated, and the land is now being divided among the 12 tribes. It's a time of celebration and settlement. But amidst all this, one old man steps forward. His name is Caleb. He approaches Joshua, the leader of Israel, and he has something to say. Think about this moment. Caleb is 85 years old, in an era where life expectancy was much shorter. He's a true elder. Most people his age would be looking for a quiet place to retire, to enjoy their final years in peace. But not Caleb. There's a fire in his eyes, a strength in his voice that defies his age. He's not here to ask for an easy inheritance. He's here to claim a promise made to him almost half a century ago. He begins by reminding Joshua of a moment that changed both their lives. He says, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me? I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions." Let's rewind. 45 years, 12 spies, one from each tribe, were sent to scout out the land of Canaan. 10 of them came back terrified. They spoke of giant-like people and fortified cities. They told the Israelites, "We can't do it. We're like grasshoppers in their sight." Their fear spread like a virus, and the people wept, wanting to go back to slavery in Egypt. But 2 men, Joshua and Caleb, saw things differently. They saw the same giants, the same fortified cities, but they also saw a faithful God who had promised them this land. Caleb stood up against the 10 spies and the entire terrified nation and declared, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Because of his faith, God made Caleb a specific promise through Moses. Caleb reminds Joshua of this, quoting Moses' words, "The land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly." While the entire generation of unbelievers was sentenced to die in the wilderness, Caleb was promised a piece of the very land he explored, a reward for his obedience, for his unwavering faith. Now, flash forward 45 years. Caleb is standing before Joshua, and his words are absolutely electrifying. He says, "Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then." Can you imagine the power in that statement? 45 years of waiting, 45 years of leading a nomadic life in a harsh desert, watching his entire generation pass away because of their unbelief. He could have become bitter. He could have given up, but his faith didn't just endure. Eat, thrive. He didn't just survive the wilderness. He maintained his strength, his readiness, his focus on the promise. He believed God would keep his word, and he lived every day preparing for the moment it would be fulfilled. His strength wasn't just physical. It was a deep spiritual vitality that came from walking with God. This is what a faith that doesn't age looks like. It doesn't get weaker with time. It gets deeper, more resilient, more certain. And then comes the climax of his speech, the moment that defines his legacy. He doesn't ask for a peaceful valley or a pre-conquered piece of land. No. Caleb looks at the map of the inheritance and points to the toughest, most dangerous territory left. He says, "Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites, the giants, were there and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out, just as he said." Think about the sheer audacity, the incredible courage of this request. Give me the mountain. Not just any mountain. He wants the hill country of Hebron, the very place where the spies had been most terrified, the stronghold of the Anakites, the legendary giants that had made the Israelites feel like grasshoppers. At 85, when most men are fading, Caleb is asking for the biggest fight. He's not relying on his own strength, even though he says he's still strong. His confidence is in God. He says, "The Lord helping me, I will drive them out." His faith wasn't in his past accomplishments, but in God's present power. This is the ultimate reward for obedience. It's not a life of ease. It's the strength and opportunity to conquer new territory for God, to face down the giants that everyone else is afraid of. The reward for Caleb's faithfulness was not retirement. It was a new assignment, a greater challenge that would bring even greater glory to God. And what happens? Joshua blesses him and gives him Hebron. And the Bible tells us that Caleb did exactly what he said he would do. He drove out the 3 giant sons of Anak from the land. He took the mountain. The story concludes beautifully with this verse. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. The reason for his success is stated so clearly. He followed the Lord wholeheartedly. Not half-heartedly, not when it was convenient. Wholeheartedly. For his entire life. From age 40 to age 85 and beyond. Caleb's story is a powerful challenge to every single one of us. What giants are you facing in your life? What hill country has God called you to take, but you've been avoiding it because it looks too difficult, too scary? Maybe it's a dream he placed in your heart years ago, a promise you've been waiting on for so long that you've started to doubt. Caleb teaches us that our age, our past failures, our circumstances, none of it is a barrier to God's power. His promises don't have an expiration date, and neither does our ability to serve him. Maybe you're young, and you feel like you have all the time in the world. Learn from Caleb to follow God wholeheartedly now. Maybe you're in your middle years, and the wilderness of life is wearing you down. Be encouraged by Caleb to maintain your strength in the Lord, keeping your eyes on his promises. Or maybe you feel like you're in the 85-year-old season of your life, thinking your time for adventure and impact is over. Caleb's story shouts a resounding no. Your greatest battle, your greatest victory, might still be ahead of you. Let's decide today to have a Caleb-like faith. A faith that doesn't shrink in the face of giants but says, "Give me this mountain." A faith that doesn't weaken with age, but grows stronger through a lifetime of wholeheartedly following God. Because the reward for that kind of obedience isn't just a piece of land. It's a legacy of courage and a testament to the faithfulness of our incredible God. Thanks for watching today. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that helps us live out our faith. Imagine standing at the edge of a dream, a promise whispered for generations, now just a heartbeat away. This was the moment for the Israelites. After 400 years of slavery in Egypt and decades of wandering in the desert, they were camped at Kadesh Barnea, on the very border of the Promised Land. The air was thick with anticipation, a mix of hope and fear. Before them lay Canaan, a land said to flow with milk and honey, the inheritance God had promised to their ancestor Abraham. But what truly lay beyond that horizon? To find out, Moses, their leader, chose 12 men, one from each tribe, for a critical mission, to go and spy out the land. Among them were 2 men whose names would echo through history, Joshua from the tribe of Ephraim and Caleb from the tribe of Judah. Their task was simple, yet monumental, to see if the land was as good as promised, to assess the strength of its people, and to bring back a report that would shape the destiny of a nation. The 12 spies ventured into Canaan, a secret reconnaissance team in a land of giants and fortified cities. For 40 days, they traveled the length and breadth of the country. They saw lush valleys, vineyards so heavy with grapes that it took 2 men to carry a single cluster on a pole. They tasted figs and pomegranates, the sweet proof that God's promise was real. This was indeed a land of abundance, a paradise waiting for them. But they also saw something else. They saw the cities with walls that seemed to touch the sky. They saw the inhabitants, Danakim, descendants of giants, men so tall and powerful that the spies felt like mere grasshoppers in comparison. The beauty of the land was undeniable, but so was the terror of its people. As they journeyed back, their minds were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The evidence of God's blessing was literally on their shoulders, yet the fear of the obstacles was heavy in their hearts. The spies returned to the camp, and the entire nation gathered to hear their report. The air crackled with expectation. They began by presenting the fruit, the tangible evidence of Canaan's richness. A wave of excitement swept through the crowd. "We went to the land where you sent us," Tay declared, "and it certainly does flow with milk and honey. And this is its fruit." But then, the tone shifted. A dark cloud of doubt began to form as 10 of the spies continued. However, they warned, their voices trembling, "The people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are." They painted a picture of doom, of an impossible mission. They described themselves as grasshoppers in the sight of giants. Their report was a virus of fear, spreading rapidly through the camp, turning hope into despair. As panic and wailing erupted among the Israelites, one voice, strong and clear, cut through the noise. "It was Caleb. He stood before the people, and with unwavering conviction, he pleaded, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." He didn't deny the challenges. He had seen the same giants, the same fortified cities, but Caleb saw something more. He saw God, who had parted the Red Sea, who had provided manna from heaven, who had brought water from a rock. His faith was not in their own strength, but in the power of the God who had made the promise. Joshua stood with him, tearing his clothes in anguish at the people's unbelief. "The land we pass through to spy out is an exceedingly good land," Joshua cried out. "If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." But the people's ears were deafened by fear. The seeds of doubt planted by the 10 spies had taken root and grown into a forest of rebellion. They wept through the night, murmuring against Moses and Aaron. "If only we had died in Egypt," they cried, "or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword?" They even spoke of choosing a new leader to take them back to the slavery of Egypt. They had forgotten the miracles, forgotten the promises. They were so close, yet their unbelief had built a wall far higher than any in Canaan. In their terror, they rejected God's gift and, in doing so, sealed their own fate. Their response was not just a lack of courage. It was a profound act of distrust against the very God who had delivered them. The moment of opportunity turned into a moment of judgment. God's disappointment was immense. He had shown them his glory and his signs, yet they had tested him 10 times and refused to obey. The consequences were severe and heartbreaking. The Lord declared that the entire generation of adults who had grumbled against him would not enter the promised land. They would wander in the wilderness for 40 years. A year for each day the spies were in Canaan, until every one of them had perished. Their children, the very ones they feared would be captured, would be the ones to inherit the land. As for the 10 spies who brought the evil report, they were struck down by a plague and died immediately. But God made a different decree for the 2 who held fast to their faith. "But my servant Caleb," God said, "because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring him to the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it." The same promise was extended to Joshua. Faith and unbelief had led to 2 starkly different destinies. One of life and inheritance, the other of wandering and death. 40 years passed. A generation fell in the desert. Moses, too, passed away, and the mantle of leadership fell upon Joshua. Now, a new generation stood where their parents had once stood, at the banks of the Jordan River, ready to enter Canaan. With God's guidance, Joshua led them. They didn't face the giants with fear, but with faith. The walls of Jericho, which had seemed so insurmountable, came tumbling down not by military might, but by a shout of faith. CD, enemy by enemy, Joshua and the Israelites conquered the land. Their victories were a testament to God's faithfulness. He was with them, just as he had promised. And Caleb, now an old man of 85, was as strong and full of faith as he was 40 years earlier. He came to Joshua and reminded him of God's promise. "Give me this mountain?" he asked, requesting the very territory of Hebron, where the dreaded Anakim giants lived. And with God's help, Caleb drove out the giants and claimed his inheritance. The story of Joshua and Caleb is more than just an ancient tale. It's a powerful lesson for our own lives. We all stand at the edge of our own promised lands, the dreams, callings, and promises God has placed in our hearts. And just like the Israelites, we will face giants, giants of fear, doubt, inadequacy, and opposition. The question is, which report will we believe? Will we listen to the 10 spies who focus on the size of the obstacles, or will we, like Joshua and Caleb, focus on the size of our God? Unbelief sees the giants. Faith sees the giant's lair. Unbelief says, we can't. Faith says, God can. The same God who was with Joshua and Caleb is with you today. He has given you promises, and he is faithful to fulfill them. Don't let fear paralyze you and cause you to wander in a wilderness of your own making. Choose to have a different spirit. Choose to follow him fully. Fix your eyes on the promise not the problem. Trust that the God who brought you this far will not abandon you now. Go forward in faith and claim the inheritance he has for you. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that builds up your faith. See you next time.